I was loading lumber into the back of my F-150 behind my shop in Cincinnati when my phone buzzed hard enough to rattle the cup holder. It was a text from my son, Tyler. "Dad, don't come to the wedding. You'll embarrass me." The words hit like a cold nail through my glove. I stared at the screen while the smell of fresh-cut pine and motor oil filled my lungs, my heartbeat thudding against the hum of the idling truck. For a second I saw him at 7 years old, wobbling on a bike I'd steadied with 2 fingers. Then the picture dissolved into that line, "Don't come," like someone scraped sandpaper across a memory. I didn't text back. Instead, I took a slow breath, felt the grit of sawdust on my tongue, and tasted the choice. Tyler's wedding plans had leaned hard on my wallet, authorization on my business card for deposits, a store line for suits, a venue hold under my name because I had the credit history he didn't. I'd offered it because that's what fathers do when they believe they're building something together. My thumb hovered over the call button, then dropped to the banking app. My face was steady in the screen's reflection. Crow's feet, drywall dust on my cheekbone. A man who'd put roofs over heads for 20 years. I moved efficiently, like I was laying tile. First, the business Amex. Remove authorized user. The click felt clean. Next, the department store account. Freeze. The app pinged, and a small wave of quiet rolled through my chest. The venue? I called the manager directly, standing in the bright buzz of the shop office. "This is Michael Carter," I said. "Release the hold and send any paid deposit back to me." She confirmed, polite and crisp. I thanked her and hung up. The phone felt lighter now, like I'd set down a plank I'd been carrying too far. Out in the yard, the winter air bit my ears. I watched my breath ghost in front of me and let the sting wake me up. Embarrass him, huh? I pictured the Tuck showroom, the way he'd glanced at me when the consultant asked who was paying, how he'd said, "My dad's got it," without looking my way. I'd chalked it up to excitement. Maybe I'd misread a lot of things. Maybe I'd let the cadence of proud father drown out the tempo of grown man. The truth settled simple in my gut. Respect is a two-way road, and I'd paved both lanes. The saws quieted inside. The guys were at lunch. I locked the shop, climbed into the truck, and let the heater roar until my fingers tingled. I typed one message, kept it short, the way we talk on job sites when the plan changes. "Tyler, I heard you. I won't come. I've also removed my accounts from your wedding expenses. If you need me for anything real, you know the number." I hit send, tossed the phone on the passenger seat, and listened to the engine purr. A steady, honest sound. As I pulled onto Reading Road, a weight I hadn't known I was carrying slid off my shoulders. The city smelled like wet concrete and coffee, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was driving my own life again. The next morning started like any other. Coffee thick enough to stand a spoon in, the smell of cedar from the shop, the hum of saws warming up. But inside, everything felt different. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting Tyler to call. Maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, maybe to say he didn't mean it. The screen stayed dark. By noon, I'd finished a porch rebuild for a client who paid in cash and compliments. As I loaded my tools, I caught my reflection in the truck window. Sun lines, calloused hands, a man who'd worked too hard for silence. I'd built Tyler's first crib, his first treehouse, his first set of shelves when he moved to college. Now he didn't want me at his wedding because I'd embarrass him. That word kept echoing like a loose screw in a fan. Embarrass him. For what? Being blue-collar? For wearing work boots instead of loafers? Around 3, my sister Carol called. "Mike, I heard from Lisa," she said carefully. Lisa was Tyler's fiancée's mom. "There's been some tension. Tyler feels like you're too direct sometimes." I laughed once, dry. "Too direct? I raised him to be honest." "I know," she said. "But maybe he's just nervous. Weddings make people stupid." "Yeah," I muttered, looking at the sky. "Some people more than others." That night I grilled steak for one and watched the news without hearing it. The phone stayed face down on the table. When I finally checked, there was a single message from my bank. Account change confirmed. No apology, no explanation from Tyler. Just business, clean and cold. I stared out the window, the neighborhood quiet except for a dog barking 2 streets over. My hands itched for something to fix, but there was nothing broken that I hadn't already accepted. Maybe that was the hardest part. Realizing the bond between a father and son can crack quietly, not with a fight, but with a text. I shut off the lights and went upstairs, each step heavy. If Tyler wanted distance, I'd give it to him, but he'd also learn what it meant to stand on his own 2 feet. Because one day, when the music stopped and the credit lines ran dry, he'd remember the man he called an embarrassment, and maybe, just maybe, understand what real pride looks like. Saturday came gray and cold, the kind of Midwest chill that seeps through your jacket and into your ribs. It was wedding day. I knew the schedule by heart. Ceremony at 4, reception at 6. A rented barn venue outside town, the kind that charges triple for rustic charm. My hands had helped hang those very lights months earlier, before things went sour. Now I sat at my kitchen table, the smell of bacon and burnt toast in the air, and stared at the clock. At 3:30 I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat by the window and imagined it all. The music, the laughter, the pictures. I pictured him in a tailored gray suit, Lisa dabbing her eyes, everyone smiling, except me. For a few minutes jealousy fought with anger, and both lost to something else. Clarity. He'd made his choice. I didn't belong there, not anymore. The phone buzzed. My buddy Ray from the hardware store texted, "Hey man, thought you'd be at the wedding. Everything okay?" I typed back, "Wasn't invited." A minute later he replied, "His loss?" I smiled faintly. Outside, the wind pushed against the maple in my yard, leaves scraping the driveway like whispers. I thought about driving out there just to see from afar, but what would that do? It wasn't my day anymore. My life didn't orbit his. So instead, I did what I knew, worked. By 6 I was in my shop, sanding a walnut tabletop under the hum of a single bulb. The rhythm of the sander drowned everything else. I imagined the vows, the applause, the first dance, and I kept sanding. The air smelled like wood and resolve. When I finally stopped, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Ray. It was a payment notification. The florist charge had bounced, his card declined, then the caterer, then the tux rental. Each one rolling in like waves on a beach I'd already left. I wiped my hands on a rag, half a smile forming. I hadn't planned revenge, but life has a way of settling its own accounts. Maybe tonight, amid the champagne and chaos, he'd learn what real independence feels like. Not the kind you post about, but the kind that humbles you when the bill comes due. I shut off the shop lights, locked up, and stood under the wide Ohio sky. The stars were faint, but steady. My world was small, maybe, but it was mine. Sunday morning hit like the smell of wet carpet after a flood. Stale, heavy, and full of what's done. I woke to 4 missed calls from Tyler. 1 voicemail, no text. I sat there on the edge of the bed, rubbing my jaw, the phone heavy in my palm. For a minute I thought about ignoring it, but then I hit play. His voice came through shaky, angry, and desperate. "Dad, what the hell did you do? The florist canceled. The venue said the payment bounced, and I had to cover everything last minute. You couldn't have waited until after the wedding?" A pause, and then quieter. "You really embarrassed me." That word again. Embarrassed. I stared at the wall, sunlight slicing through the blinds across the framed photo of us from his high school graduation. He'd had his arm around me, proud, smiling, before the world told him who was worth standing next to. I set the phone down and let the silence soak in. By noon, the call came again. I answered this time. "Dad, do you have any idea how bad you made me look yesterday?" His voice was tight, like he was holding back tears or rage I couldn't tell. "I didn't make you look any way, son," I said calmly. "You asked me not to come. I respected that. But the accounts, why'd you shut them off like that?" "Because they were mine. You said I'd embarrass you, Tyler. I figured you didn't want my help either." There was a pause, just breathing on the line. Then, "You didn't have to do it that way. You didn't have to talk to me that way," I replied. "But we make our choices, don't we?" He hung up. No goodbye, just the click and the empty hum of disconnection. I stood there, the smell of coffee cooling on the counter, my heart steady but tired. That evening my sister texted again. He and Lisa had to cut half the reception. They're saying the caterer backed out. Caterer didn't back out, I wrote back. He just met a bill that wasn't prepaid. I went out to the porch with a beer and watched the neighborhood quiet down. Kids inside, sprinklers off, sky burning orange over the rooftops. I thought about how life teaches lessons, not through speeches, but through stumbles. And sometimes, you have to let the people you love fall hard enough to hear the echo of their own pride. As the crickets started up and the light faded, I whispered to no one, "Maybe now you'll understand who embarrassed who." The next few weeks passed in a fog of routine. Early mornings, sawdust in the air, the thrum of hammers filling the silence that my son left behind. You can measure pain in quiet, I learned. The less sound a house makes, the heavier it feels. Tyler hadn't called again since that Sunday. No apology, no explanation, not even a text, just absence. Every night, I'd catch myself setting 2 plates at the dinner table before realizing I only needed 1. Old habits. Sometimes I'd glance at my phone between bites, waiting for something. A voicemail. Hey, can we talk? But the screen stayed blank, lit only by the reflection of a man learning what boundaries feel like. The town didn't help. Cincinnati's small enough that gossip gets around faster than delivery trucks. A customer mentioned the wedding one morning while I was installing new cabinets. "Heard your boy's ceremony was eventful," he said, trying not to pry. I just smiled, said, "Young folks learn quick when the money stops," and went back to drilling hinges. At night, when the house settled and the furnace kicked in, memories came like ghosts. Tyler on the baseball field, me cheering too loud from the stands. Tyler at 15, slamming the door after his first breakup. Tyler asking me to co-sign his first car loan, grinning like he owned the world. I'd always been the man behind the curtain, the quiet hand that made things happen. Maybe I'd stayed there too long, hidden behind my own sense of duty. One evening, Carol stopped by with a casserole and her patented mix of sympathy and annoyance. "You gonna call him?" she asked, setting it down. "No," I said. "He knows where I am." Stubborn runs in this family," she said with a sigh. "Yeah, but so does pride," I answered, half smiling. We ate in silence for a bit. She finally said, "You know, Mike, you didn't lose him. You just gave him the room to find himself." "Maybe," I muttered, looking out the window. "But sometimes finding yourself means losing who raised you." That night, after she left, I stood by the old workbench in my garage. The air smelled like varnish and winter. I picked up a half-finished project, a wooden keepsake box I'd started for Tyler before everything blew up. The lid still had the pencil outline of his initials. I ran my thumb over the rough grain, feeling the edges bite lightly into my skin. I thought about finishing it, sanding it smooth, staining it rich and dark, maybe sending it to him as a quiet peace offering. But then I realized I didn't want to be the first to reach out. Not out of anger, but because a man who never faces consequences never grows into one himself. So I set the box down, turned off the light, and went to bed. The silence followed me upstairs, but it didn't hurt as much anymore. It just settled, like sawdust after a long day. Proof of work done, lessons cut clean. Still, a small part of me hoped that someday he'd walk through that door, look at the half-finished box, and finally see what I'd been building all along. It was a Thursday evening when I heard the knock. Slow, hesitant, almost guilty. I wiped my hands on a rag, the smell of varnish still thick in the air, and opened the door. Tyler stood there. His hair was shorter than I remembered, his face thinner, suit jacket wrinkled like he'd slept in the car. Behind him, the dusk painted everything gold except his eyes. Those looked gray and tired. "Hey, Dad," he said, voice low. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us felt like an old bridge, fragile but still standing. I stepped aside, motioned him in. "You hungry?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just wanted to talk." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd done homework, eaten birthday cake, argued about curfews. He glanced around, maybe noticing nothing had changed. The same tools on the counter, the same old mug with my company logo. "You still got the shop running?" "Yeah," I said. "Work doesn't stop." He nodded slowly, hands clasped. "Lisa's been mad at me," he said. "She didn't know about the accounts until the bills started showing up. Guess that's a tough way to start a marriage." He gave a short laugh, then sighed. "Yeah, I screwed up, Dad." That was the first real thing he'd said in months. I didn't jump in, just let the silence sit. He rubbed his palms together like he was trying to warm something that wasn't there. I thought you were holding me back. I wanted to prove I could do it on my own. I wanted to look like I had everything under control." He looked up at me. "But I didn't." I leaned back, arms crossed, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't prove you're a man by shutting out the one who taught you how to stand." He swallowed hard. "I know. I was wrong." For the first time, I saw the kid again. Not the groom in a rented tux or the adult trying too hard to be one, but the boy who once thought I could fix anything. And maybe, in that moment, I could again. "I didn't do it to hurt you," I said quietly. "But you needed to see what happens when you burn bridges and expect someone else to rebuild them." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I get that now. And I'm sorry." I stood, walked over to the workbench and picked up the wooden box. I'd finished it 2 nights before, not even knowing why. The grain shimmered under the light, warm and smooth. I set it in front of him. "Made this for you before the wedding," I said. "Didn't think I'd ever hand it over." He traced the initials on top, his thumb trembling a little. "You always made things that lasted." "That's the idea," I said. "Things should last if they're built right. Even relationships." We sat there for a long time. No words needed. The house didn't feel so quiet anymore. Somewhere outside, a car drove by, a dog barked, and life kept moving. When he finally stood to leave, he looked taller somehow, lighter. "I'll call you this weekend," he said. "I'll be here," I replied. After he drove off, I stood by the door watching the taillights fade. The ache in my chest didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like something being repaired. One nail, one word, one small act at a time. And maybe that's how fathers and sons rebuild. Not with grand gestures or perfect speeches, but with quiet visits and second chances. The following Saturday, I woke earlier than usual. The sun was just crawling over the rooftops, painting the frost on the shop windows gold. The world outside was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater and the distant cry of a train. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch steps, watching steam rise from the mug. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what might come next. Tyler called right around noon like he said he would. His voice sounded steadier this time. "Hey, Dad, you busy today?" "Never too busy for you," I said, keeping it even. He hesitated. "I was thinking, maybe I could come by the shop. Lisa wants a dining table and I told her you could probably build one better than anything in a store." That got a smile out of me. "Yeah, I could do that. Bring her by." When they arrived, Lisa looked nervous, polite smile, hands tucked into her coat pockets. She'd met me once before, back when things were still good between Tyler and me. Now she seemed unsure how to fit in the picture. "Hi, Mr. Carter," she said. "It's good to see you." "Mike's fine," I said, shaking her hand. "Glad you're here." We walked into the shop. The place smelled like oak dust and machine oil, the scent of home. Tyler ran his hand over the workbench, smiling faintly. "Man, I missed this smell." "Smells like sweat and patience," I said. "You don't get that from office air." Lisa laughed, a small, genuine sound, and I saw a flicker of ease pass between the three of us. She started describing the table she wanted, all excitement and Pinterest references, and Tyler tried to keep up with measurements that made no sense. I couldn't help but chuckle. "You want it modern or something that'll outlast the both of you?" "Outlast us," she said, smiling. "Definitely." So I sketched something simple but strong. Clean lines, no shortcuts, like the way I tried to raise my son. We worked for hours, cutting, planing, sanding. Tyler handled the smaller tools. I guided him when he needed it. The sound of the saws filled the air like old music. Every once in a while, he'd glance at me with this look, part gratitude, part realization, the same way I used to look at my own dad when I finally understood why he was so hard on me. At one point, we took a break, sitting on overturned buckets with sandwiches and coffee. The winter sun filtered through the shop windows, dust motes dancing in the beams. Tyler wiped his hands on his jeans. "Lisa said something last night," he started. "She said she's glad I've got you." I raised an eyebrow. "You told her everything?" "Yeah. And she said if we're gonna build a family, I should learn how to build things that last. Like you said." I chuckled softly. "Smart woman." He nodded, looking serious now. "I want to make things right, Dad. Not just with you, but with the kind of man I'm trying to be." "You're already on the right path," I said. "You just needed to hit a wall to realize what direction you were running." We went back to work, side by side. No lectures, no lingering resentment. Just wood, glue, sawdust, and something unspoken settling between us. By sunset, the table was assembled, the grain catching the fading light like fire. Lisa ran her hand over it and smiled. "It's perfect," she said. Tyler looked at me, then at the table. "You know," he said, "maybe we could build more together. Stuff for clients, weddings, homes, whatever. You've got the skill, I've got the business degree. Could work." I studied him for a moment. His tone wasn't prideful. It was hopeful. "Let's see where it goes," I said. "But if we do this, it's partnership, not father paying the bills." He grinned. "Deal." As they drove off, I stood in the doorway of the shop, watching the sky fade from gold to deep blue. The table sat in the corner, gleaming, waiting for stain. It wasn't just furniture anymore. It was a marker of something reclaimed. I thought about that first text. "Don't come to the wedding, you'll embarrass me." Now, watching my son drive away, I realized he'd finally learned what real pride looked like. It wasn't about hiding where you came from. It was about being man enough to come back home and build something better. And as the night settled over the quiet shop, I smiled. Maybe that's how fathers and sons rebuild the world. One piece of wood, one second chance, one honest day's work at a time. A few weeks later, the table was done. Smooth as glass, stained deep walnut, edges rounded just enough to feel lived in. When Tyler and Lisa came to pick it up, I watched him run his fingers over the finish like it was something sacred. He didn't say much at first, just looked at me with that quiet pride only a man who's built something real can understand. Then he grinned. "Guess it's time I start calling this the Carter way, huh?" We loaded the table into his truck together. The air was sharp with that late winter bite, and every breath came out in white clouds. Lisa fussed with blankets and straps while Tyler checked the tie-downs twice. It reminded me of when I used to teach him how to secure lumber for delivery. Same habits, same caution. But now he was the one taking the lead. It hit me then. Maybe this was what every father hopes for. To see his son carry the torch, steady and sure. After they left, I stood alone in the driveway, watching the taillights fade into the distance. The shop was quiet behind me, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Instead, it felt alive again. There was a spark in me I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes when life shifts direction. Not with noise or chaos, but with quiet purpose. The kind you don't see coming until it's already reshaping you. That night, I got a call from Tyler. "Dad," he said, his voice full, lighter than I'd heard in months. "Lisa's folks came over for dinner. They couldn't stop talking about the table. Her dad asked who made it, and when I told him, he said we should start a business. Custom furniture, father and son. He's got friends who'd pay good money for stuff like this." I leaned back in my chair, smiling into the dark. "You sure you're ready to work that hard?" He laughed. "If it's with you, yeah." We talked for another hour about logistics, designs, even a name. He suggested Carter and Son Woodworks. I told him that sounded too old-fashioned, but secretly I loved it. I could already picture it. A small shop, the smell of oak and coffee, sawdust floating in the morning light, and my son by my side, both of us shaping something that would last. When I hung up, I sat there for a while, just listening to the hum of the house. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the quiet kind that comes from giving up, but the solid kind that grows when something broken starts to hold its shape again. I thought back to that first message, the sting, the silence, the hurt, and I realized something. If I hadn't let go back then, neither of us would have learned what we were made of. Sometimes, you have to let the bridge burn to see who's willing to build another one beside you. The next morning, I unlocked the shop early. The air smelled like promise, sawdust, cold metal, and a new start. I set out 2 mugs, started the coffee pot, and waited. Because I knew when the sun came up over the ridge, my son would walk through that door again. Not as a boy ashamed of where he came from, but as a man proud to build something with his own hands. And when he did, I'd be ready. Hammer in hand, heart steady, building not just tables or chairs, but a legacy neither of us would ever walk away from again. By spring, the shop had changed. Tyler's pickup was parked beside mine every morning before sunrise, and the smell of coffee mixed with sawdust had become our new normal. We'd cleared out half the old storage area to make space for new tools, and a small sign over the front door that read, "Carter & Son Woodworks." The letters weren't fancy, just black paint on reclaimed oak. But every time I passed under it, it felt like walking through the start of something solid. Orders came faster than we expected. Lisa had started a small social media page for us, posting photos of the dining table and the process behind it. Within a week, messages rolled in. Couples wanting custom headboards, newlyweds asking for benches, families wanting heirlooms, built by hand, built to last. Tyler handled the emails and invoices while I stayed in the dust and noise, shaping wood the way I always had. Steady, patient, deliberate. He'd pop his head in every so often, face streaked with sawdust, and shout over the machines, "Dad, you're trending again." I didn't know what that meant, but I liked the sound of it. There were moments that tested us, though. One afternoon, a high-end client came by for a quote on a custom wine cabinet. Tyler quoted him high, trying to sound confident. The guy flinched, said it was too much, and Tyler looked at me, unsure. I stepped forward, wiped my hands and said, "You're not paying for wood, sir. You're paying for something your grandkids will still use. If that's not worth the price, maybe you're not our customer." He left without shaking hands, but 2 days later, he called back and ordered 2 cabinets. Tyler just grinned. "Guess you still know how to sell," he said. "No," I told him. "I just know what things are worth." At lunch breaks, we'd sit outside by the loading dock, eating sandwiches and talking like we hadn't in years. He told me about the pressure he'd felt before the wedding, the expectations, the image, the fear of not measuring up. I told him about my own father, a steelworker who never said much but taught me more with his silence than any lecture could. Somewhere in those talks, the gap between us started closing. One evening, as we locked up, Tyler leaned against the doorway, watching the sunset bleed through the trees. "You ever think we'd get here?" he asked. I smiled, flipping the shop lights off one by one. "Not like this," I said. "But sometimes life has to sand you down before it shapes you." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the quiet hum of the house, thinking about how far we'd come. A few months ago, my son didn't want me at his wedding. Now we were building a business together, laughing again, speaking the same language: wood, sweat, and second chances. In the morning, I walked into the shop before sunrise, the light spilling in through the windows like liquid gold. The tools waited, the wood stood stacked, and the sign above the door caught the first ray of light. Carter & Son Woodworks. It wasn't just a name, it was a promise that no matter what life threw at us, we'd keep building. Because that's what men like us do. We take what's broken, what's bent, what's been burned to the ground, and we build it back stronger. By summer, the business was running hot. We had more orders than we could handle, tools humming from sunrise to sundown, and a wait list long enough to make Lisa start talking about expanding operations. It was the kind of success that should have felt like a dream come true, but deep down, I knew every man faces the moment when growth tests what he's built. It started small. A client from Chicago offered a massive contract for 10 high-end tables, double our usual rate. Tyler was thrilled, eyes bright like a kid on Christmas. "Dad, this could put us on the map," he said. "It's our chance to go national." But I'd seen enough deals in my lifetime to know fast money burns faster than dry pine. "We're not ready for that scale yet," I said. "Let's not trade quality for speed." He didn't like that. The first real tension since we'd rebuilt things flickered in his eyes. "You're too cautious," he argued. "This isn't the old days. People move fast now." "Yeah," I said quietly, "and that's why most of them crash just as fast." He walked off, shoulders stiff, leaving the scent of frustration behind him. I went back to sanding, the rhythm of the paper steady and grounding. Fathers learn early that you can't lecture a grown son. You just keep the light on and wait for him to find his way back. 2 weeks later, he came into the shop early. I could tell by his face something had gone wrong before he even opened his mouth. "Dad," he said softly, "the Chicago deal fell through. They wanted mass production, cheap labor overseas. I said no." He sighed, dropping onto a stool. "Guess you were right." I set down the sander. "No," I said. "You were right to try. Just means you know where our line is now." That night we stayed late finishing a small commission for a local couple, a rocking chair for their newborn. The smell of varnish filled the shop and the radio played low, some old Springsteen song about fathers and sons. Tyler worked quietly, steady, deliberate. At one point, he looked up and said, "You ever regret being so hard on me growing up?" I thought about it for a moment. The sound of the wind outside, the glow of the shop light bouncing off the wood. "No," I said finally, "because it made you stand tall. I just wish I'd told you more often that I was proud of you." He didn't answer right away, but when he smiled, it wasn't the awkward grin of a kid seeking approval. It was a man's smile, the kind that says he's learned the same truth you did, the hard way. We finished the chair close to midnight. When we stood it up under the lamp, the finish glowed like honey. It creaked softly when he rocked it, and we both laughed. "It's not perfect," he said. "Neither are we," I replied. "But it'll hold." And maybe that's what mattered most. Not perfection, not profit, not pride, just the strength to hold. The next morning I found a sticky note on my toolbox, Tyler's handwriting. It said, "You were never an embarrassment. You were the example." I stood there for a long while, sunlight streaming through the shop windows, feeling that line sink deep. Maybe this was what every father works for. Not applause or gratitude, but that one quiet moment when your son finally sees you clearly. And as I got back to work, I realized something. Wood isn't the only thing you can shape with your hands. Sometimes, if you're patient enough, you can rebuild a life, too. Autumn rolled into town with that slow Midwest grace. Mornings wrapped in fog, evenings smelling like rain and wood smoke. The trees along the back road behind the shop were starting to turn, gold and red like embers waiting to catch. Business was steady, life was quiet, and for the first time in years, peace didn't feel like an accident. It felt earned. Every board we planned, every nail we drove, carried the rhythm of something deeper. A father and son who had finally learned to build without breaking each other. One Friday morning, Tyler walked into the shop holding 2 coffees and a manila folder. "Got something for you?" he said. I took the folder, half curious, half wary. Inside were the legal papers. Official documents registering Carter & Son Woodworks, LLC. He'd filed everything, handled the taxes, even set up a small logo with our initials burned into a grain pattern. "You're the owner too, 50-50, he said. "Couldn't have done it without you." I looked at the papers for a long moment, then at him. It wasn't about the business. It was about respect, the kind that comes back only when it's earned both ways. That afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up with new equipment, a bandsaw, planer, and some high-end polishers. Tyler had negotiated a supplier deal. I stood there watching him handle it, confident, professional, his sleeves rolled, voice calm and sure. It hit me again how much he'd grown, not just into a man, but into his own kind of leader. He wasn't the kid trying to impress anyone anymore. He was someone I'd trust to run the shop even if I never came back. That realization filled me with a strange kind of pride. The quiet, steady kind that doesn't need to be said aloud. As the sun started dropping, I walked out back to the small patch of land behind the shop. Tyler joined me, hands in his pockets. "Remember when you used to bring me out here after work?" he asked. "You'd hand me a scrap of wood and tell me to make something out of it." I nodded. "That's how you learn to see potential," I said. "Even in what looks useless." He smiled, eyes on the fading light. "Guess you did that with me too." The air went still for a moment, and all I could hear was the rustle of dry leaves. That simple sentence. That was it. Everything I'd ever wanted to hear, all wrapped into one quiet truth. No apology, No grand speech. Just understanding. When we went back inside, I noticed the old wooden box I'd given him months ago sitting on the shelf, polished and gleaming. He'd kept it in the shop, next to our best work. "Why do you keep that old thing around?" I asked, half teasing. Tyler shrugged. "Because that's where it started. The first thing you ever gave me that I didn't deserve yet." That night, after he left, I locked up and stood under the sign again. Carter and Son Woodworks. The air smelled like pine, rain, and tomorrow. The lights from the shop glowed through the windows, soft and warm, and I felt something inside settle for good. I thought about that first text. "Don't come to the wedding, you'll embarrass me." Funny how words that once tore you apart can later remind you how far you've come. My son didn't need saving anymore. He needed a man beside him who believed he could build something on his own. And me? I finally understood what legacy really means. It's not the money, or the name, or even the business. It's watching the man you raised take everything you taught him, the pain, the lessons, the pride, and carve something stronger out of it. As I turned off the last light, I whispered to the empty room, "You did good, kid." Then I walked out into the crisp autumn night, the scent of wood and redemption following close behind. By late November, the mornings had turned cold enough to see your breath indoors. The heaters groaned to life every dawn, and the shop smelled of warm metal and cedar dust. Tyler came in carrying a newspaper, something he rarely did. "You might want to see this," he said, grinning like a kid who'd pulled off a magic trick. I wiped my hands on a rag, took the paper, and froze when I saw the headline, "Local Father and Son, Crafting Heirlooms That Last Generations." The article was right there on the business section front page. A full spread about Carter and Son Woodworks. It told the story of a small-town operation built on honesty, quality, and family redemption. There was even a picture of us, him at the bench, me beside the planer, both mid-laugh, caught between sawdust and sunlight. I hadn't even noticed when the photographer came by last week. Reading it, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pride exactly, but something deeper, heavier, like the world was finally seeing us the way we saw each other. "Reporter said our story hit home," Tyler said. "Apparently people love a good father-son comeback." I chuckled, setting the paper down. "Guess I finally embarrassed you the right way, huh?" He laughed. "Yeah, this time I'll take it." That day was busy. Orders doubled overnight. Lisa called excited, saying customers were messaging nonstop. We worked side by side until long after sunset, the radio playing low blues in the background. I'd catch Tyler glancing at me now and then, not to seek approval but to share the moment, like he understood how much it meant. Later that night, after he left, I sat alone in the shop with the paper spread across my workbench. My name printed next to his. Our story, out there in the world. I thought about the path that led here, the silence, the anger, the heartbreak of that message. "Don't come to the wedding." And I realized that sometimes, the worst thing someone says to you isn't the end. It's just the spark. I walked outside and leaned against the truck, looking at the stars. The cold air bit at my fingers, but I didn't care. Somewhere out there, life had turned itself around without me forcing it. Maybe that's how it works. You build, you break, and you build again. The next morning, the phone rang off the hook. A big furniture distributor wanted to talk partnerships. Tyler handled it like a pro. Calm, polite, decisive. I watched him from across the room, his voice steady, confident. I'd spent years wondering if he'd ever become the man I hoped he'd be. Now I knew. He'd become his own. When he hung up, I handed him the mug of coffee I'd just poured. "You did good, son," I said. He smiled. "Took a hell of a teacher." The saws roared back to life, and sunlight streamed through the shop windows, painting everything gold again. The sign outside, Carter and Son, swayed lightly in the wind, and for the first time, I felt like the story was complete. Not perfect, not clean, but whole. Because in the end, that's what life gives men like us. Not fairy tales, but full circles. Broken beginnings that lead back to stronger hands, clearer hearts, and legacies built one nail, one lesson, one son at a time. Winter rolled in hard that year, the kind of cold that makes your breath burn. But the shop was alive. Orders poured in, The phones never stopped, and every inch of workbench was covered in sketches and sawdust. Tyler had turned the front office into a small showroom, hung photos of our best work, and even installed warm lights that made everything glow like a page from a magazine. I'd never been one for show, but watching him turn our trade into something polished made me proud in a way I couldn't put into words. One morning, we got a letter, a real stamped envelope, not an email. It was from a furniture conglomerate based out of Chicago. They'd read about us in the paper and wanted to make a deal. The letter offered to buy Carter & Son Woodworks, keep the name, and bring us on as creative consultants. The number they put down was enough to make any man's hands shake. Tyler looked at me, eyes wide. "Dad, this could change everything," he said. "We'd never have to worry about work again." I read the letter twice, then set it down on the table between us. "You know what happens when you sell your name, right?" I said. "You stop owning it." He frowned, running a hand through his hair. "But think about it. Bigger shop, national orders, no more 16-hour days." I smiled softly. "Son, those 16-hour days are the point." For a while, we didn't speak. The machines filled the silence, humming like distant thunder. Tyler paced, thinking it through. I could see the tug of war in his face. Ambition versus roots, money versus meaning. I'd fought that same battle once, back when he was little and I worked construction out of state for better pay. I remembered the nights I'd missed his games, the look in his eyes when I'd get home too tired to talk. Some things you can't buy back with checks. That night we sat on the tailgate of my truck out back, watching our breath turn white in the dark. "I know what you're thinking," he said finally. "You think they'll water it down, make it soulless." I shrugged. "They will, because people who don't build with their hands never understand the soul in the work." He nodded slowly, quiet. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You know, when I told you not to come to my wedding, I thought success meant proving I didn't need you. Now I realize it means honoring what you built before me." The next morning, he called the company himself. I stood by the door listening. "Thank you for the offer," he said, voice firm. "But we're not selling. Carter & Son stays right where it started." After he hung up, he looked at me and grinned. "You taught me how to stand my ground. Guess it stuck." I laughed. "Guess it did." The weeks that followed felt lighter. We didn't talk about the offer again. We just worked, sanding, carving, finishing pieces that people would gather around for generations. Sometimes Lisa would bring lunch, or my sister Carol would drop by, smiling like she'd known all along this was where it would end up. On Christmas Eve, we closed early. Tyler helped me hang the last sign of the year, closed for family. As we locked up, he turned to me and said, "You ever think maybe everything had to happen exactly like it did? Even the bad parts?" I looked at him, the cold biting my fingers, the lights from the shop glowing behind us. "Yeah," I said. "Sometimes life's just a rough cut before the final polish." That night, back home, I sat by the fireplace with a glass of bourbon and watched the snow fall outside. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty anymore. Somewhere out there, my son was sitting with his wife, maybe looking at that table we built, and I knew I hadn't lost anything. I just waited long enough for it to come back better. And as the fire crackled low, I thought about legacy again. Not as something you leave behind, but something you pass down while you're still here. The new year arrived under a thick blanket of snow, the kind that muffles sound and slows time. Cincinnati was quiet, the roads coated in frost, the world pressing pause for a moment. I stood inside the shop before dawn, sipping my coffee, the smell of roasted beans mixing with the clean bite of winter air seeping through the doorframe. The sign outside, Carter & Son Woodworks, was half covered in snow, but it didn't matter. The name was built to last, just like everything we made inside these walls. Tyler pulled in a few minutes later, headlights sweeping across the drifts. He stepped out, bundled in a heavy coat, cheeks red from the cold. "You're in early," he said, shaking off the snow. "Old habits," I replied. "This place doesn't like to sleep in." He laughed, that same sound that used to fill the house when he was a kid watching me tinker in the garage. We worked quietly for the first hour, the air thick with the rhythm of saws and sanders, wood chips flying like snowflakes. There's a peace in repetition, a truth that only men who build things understand. It's not about the product, it's about the process, the honesty and effort. Every board has a story. Every scar on your hand is a signature. By mid-morning, the shop was warm and alive. Lisa stopped by with muffins, her hair dusted with snow, and handed us coffee refills with a smile that could thaw ice. "You two have been all over the news again," she said. "A local blogger wrote that you're reviving the lost art of father-son craftsmanship." Tyler chuckled. "Guess we're old-school celebrities now." I just shook my head, smiling. "We're not reviving anything," I said. "We're just doing what people forgot had value." She leaned against the counter, looking around the shop. "You know, every piece you two make, it feels like it has a heartbeat." "That's the goal," I said softly. "Everything should outlive us. Otherwise, what's the point?" After she left, we went back to work on a commission that had taken over half the floor. A 10-foot walnut conference table for a small tech startup downtown. Tyler had designed it with hidden joints and a live edge finish, and I'd spent 2 weeks hand-smoothing every surface. The grain shimmered under the lights like flowing water. "You ever think this would be our life?" he asked. "Building things for people we'll never meet?" I smiled. "Doesn't matter who uses it. What matters is, it was made right. You leave your fingerprints in the work, even when they can't see them." Around noon, the delivery truck pulled up, tires crunching over ice. We loaded the table together, strapping it down with care. Tyler checked the tension twice, same way I used to. As the truck pulled away, I saw that look in his eyes, the quiet pride that only comes from seeing something through from start to finish. It hit me again. He wasn't the boy trying to impress the world anymore. He was the man building one piece of it at a time. That evening, we locked up early. The wind had picked up, and the sky was turning the color of wet slate. Inside the truck, the heater groaned against the cold as we drove toward home. "You ever think about retirement?" he asked suddenly. I laughed. "Retirement? That's for people who hate what they do." "Yeah, but you've been at this for decades," he said. "You've earned some rest." I shook my head, watching the snow fall in the headlights. "Son, I don't build because I have to. I build because I wouldn't know who I was without it." When you make things with your hands, you stay connected. To the world, to yourself. That's something rest can't give you. He nodded quietly, thoughtful. "Guess I get that now. I used to think you worked too hard, that you were trying to prove something. But now I see, you just didn't know how to live any other way." "Exactly," I said, smiling. "You learn that by doing, by showing up every day and giving your best, even when no one's watching. Especially then." When we got back to the house, the lights from Lisa's car glowed in the driveway. She'd made dinner, roast chicken, vegetables, warm bread. We ate together, laughing over small things, talking about the future. It felt easy, natural, the kind of peace you don't realize you're missing until it returns. After dinner, Tyler lingered at the table, swirling his drink. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think legacy was about money, or success, or getting your name out there. But it's not, is it?" I looked at him, the firelight flickering against his face. "No," I said. "Legacy's about what you leave in people, not what you leave to them." He nodded slowly. "Then I think you've done your job." We sat there for a long while, neither of us needing to say more. The fire cracked softly. Snow whispered against the windows, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel before. Rest. Not from work, but from worry. My son didn't just love me again. He understood me, and maybe that's all a father ever really wants. The next morning, I walked into the shop before sunrise, as always. The light coming through the frosted windows painted everything gold. The tools were in their places, the floor swept clean, the smell of wood and oil grounding me. I ran a hand over the old workbench, scarred and stained from decades of use. It was the only witness to every version of me. Young, angry, proud, broken, and finally, whole. On the bench sat something new, a small wooden plaque, hand-carved with steady lines. It read, "For Dad, the man who built everything that matters." I stood there for a long time, just staring at it, feeling the weight of it sink deep into my chest. No words, no speeches, just the quiet truth of a son who finally saw the man behind the sawdust. I picked it up, traced the letters with my thumb, and smiled. Outside, the snow had stopped. The air was clean and sharp, the kind that makes you feel alive all over again. I opened the door, stepped into the cold, and looked up at the sign swinging gently in the wind. Carter and Son Woodworks. And for the first time, I realized it wasn't just a business name. It was a story. Our story. One built from mistakes, rebuilt with forgiveness, and held together by hands that never stopped trying. The kind of story that, if you're lucky, outlasts the men who made it. Winter melted into spring slowly that year, as if the earth itself didn't want to rush. The snow retreated from the fields 1 inch at a time, and the river by the old mill began to move again, breaking apart the last sheets of ice. Every morning when I pulled up to the shop, the frost would still cling to the corners of the windows, but the sun came earlier now, warm, patient, full of promise. Inside, Carter and Son Woodworks had changed in ways that made me smile every time I walked through the door. Tyler had organized everything: the invoices, the shelves, the workflow, even a corner where Lisa kept her design sketches for future marketing. She'd turned the place into something halfway between a workshop and an art studio, yet it still smelled like what it always had: pine, sweat, and sawdust. The kind of smell that told you real work was being done. That morning, we had a big delivery scheduled: 3 handcrafted tables for a local school's library. They'd been part of a community renovation project Lisa helped pitch, and she'd made sure our bid was chosen. "They could have gone with cheaper prefab furniture," she said proudly, brushing sawdust off her sleeve. "But they wanted heart. They wanted your craftsmanship." I grinned. "Our craftsmanship," I corrected her, and she smiled, like that meant more than the sale itself. Tyler came out from the back, carrying a sander, his shirt already covered in fine dust. "We've got 30 minutes before pickup," he said. "You sure we can finish the last coat in time?" I gave him a look. "Have I ever missed a deadline?" He smirked. "Yeah, but I figured getting older might slow you down." "Keep talking like that," I said, "and I'll make you hand sand the next batch yourself." He laughed, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the kid he used to be, the one who'd hide behind my legs when he was shy, or follow me around the garage just to hold a screwdriver he didn't know how to use. Except now, he wasn't pretending anymore. Now his hands were steady, his decisions his own. By the time the truck arrived, the tables gleamed under the morning light. The librarian, a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, ran her hand across the wood and said, "You can feel the care in it." That line stuck with me. You can feel the care, not see it, not measure it, feel it. That's what craftsmanship is, I thought, when effort becomes emotion in physical form. When the truck pulled away, Tyler stood beside me, watching the dust settle on the road. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking, what if we expand? Maybe a second shop closer to downtown. Something modern, with a showroom. We could reach more people." I didn't say anything for a while. I'd been waiting for this moment, the one where ambition comes knocking again. But this time his tone was different. He wasn't trying to run ahead of himself. He was thinking long-term, steady. "You think you're ready to split your time between 2 shops?" I asked finally. He shrugged. "Maybe not right now, but someday. I don't want to lose what we have here. I want to build on it." I nodded slowly. "Then that's how I'll know you're ready. When you expand without forgetting why you started." That night, after everyone left, I stayed behind in the shop. The place was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. I walked along the rows of finished projects, tables, cabinets, chairs, all waiting for their new homes. Each one was a story carved in wood, a timeline of lessons. I stopped at my old workbench, the same one I'd used since the day I opened this place 25 years ago. The surface was scarred, the grain worn smooth in spots from years of pressure and repetition. I ran my fingers over one deep gouge near the corner. Tyler had made that mark when he was 11, pretending to carve his name into a piece of scrap. I'd yelled at him for it back then. Now it was my favorite part of the bench, proof that he'd been here from the start, even before he realized he belonged. I leaned against the counter, listening to the ticking of the old clock on the wall. It was the only thing that hadn't changed since the early days. I thought about the long nights, the broken orders, the years I'd worked through holidays trying to make ends meet. There was a time when I'd questioned if it was worth it, if all this effort meant anything beyond survival. But now, looking around, I knew it had. Not because of the money or the recognition, but because this place had shaped my son into a man. The door creaked open behind me. Tyler stood there, coat half zipped, like he wasn't sure if he should have come back. "Forgot my phone," he said, then paused when he saw me staring at the bench. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Just thinking." He stepped closer, glanced at the gouge. "You used to hate that mark." "Still do," I lied. He smiled. "You know, I used to think you built things because you liked being alone. Now I think you built things because it was the only way you knew how to love." I turned to him, caught off guard. "That's a strange way to put it." "Maybe," he said. "But it's true. Every time you made something, it was like you were giving a piece of yourself away. That's what I want to do too." For a long moment I couldn't speak. All the years of distance, of misunderstanding, of quiet resentment, they were gone. In their place was understanding. Not perfect, not polished, but solid, like the furniture we made, beautiful because of its flaws. We stood there a while longer, the two of us framed by the soft hum of the shop lights. Finally I said, "When I'm gone, this place will be yours. But don't ever let it be a burden. If you need to change it, change it. Just don't lose what matters." He nodded slowly. "And what's that?" I smiled. "The hands that built it." The next morning, I came in to find him already there, sanding a slab of oak. The radio played low, and sunlight poured through the windows, lighting the air full of dust motes like gold flakes. He looked up and said, "You coming in late now?" "Just pacing myself," I said. "Old men earn that." "Old men?" he repeated, smirking. "You're not old, Dad. You're classic." I laughed, shaking my head, and got to work beside him. The saws sang their usual tune, steady and alive. And in that moment, I realized the truth every father eventually faces. Someday, your son's hands become steadier than yours. But if you've done it right, you don't feel replaced. You feel fulfilled. The shop was our home. The legacy was alive. And the man who once stood alone behind a workbench now worked beside his equal. That's the thing about building. It's never really about the wood. It's about what grows between the cracks, in the spaces where words once failed. It's about the love you shape without saying it. And as I watched my son carve a clean, straight line across a piece of oak, I realized I didn't need to guide him anymore. I'd already taught him everything that mattered. He'd taken my name, my craft, and my mistakes, and turned them into something lasting, something alive. Spring gave way to summer, and the shop breathed in rhythm with the season. The windows stayed open all day, letting in the scent of cut grass and distant rain. The sounds of saws and sanders mixed with birdsong and passing trucks on the highway. It was the kind of simple music that fills a life quietly, the kind you don't notice until one day you realize you wouldn't trade it for anything. Carter & Son Woodworks was thriving more than ever. Orders came in from neighboring states now, people who'd read the article or seen our photos online. We could have doubled our prices, maybe even opened that second shop downtown, but I wasn't chasing more anymore. I wanted steadiness, not expansion. The kind of success that fits neatly in your hands instead of spilling out of them. Tyler, though, he was made for growth. He'd learned my patience but not my fear of ambition, and that was good. He was already sketching ideas for modular designs, new finishes, even training apprentices. One afternoon, he caught me watching him work. "What?" he said, smiling. "Just wondering when you're going to start bossing me around." He laughed, shaking his head. "Never gonna happen. You built this, Dad. I'm just keeping it alive." I thought about that later when the day quieted and he'd gone home. The shop was still, golden in the last light. My eyes landed on the plaque he'd made for me months earlier. For Dad, the man who built everything that matters. I lifted it off the shelf and turned it over in my hands. The wood was cherry, smooth and strong. I could still see the faint knife marks where he'd carved the letters, uneven and human. That's what made it beautiful. That's what made all of this beautiful. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and drove out to the lake outside town. I hadn't been there in years, not since Tyler was a kid and we used to fish off the old dock. The air was thick with mist, the surface of the water smooth as glass. I sat at the edge, a thermos of coffee in one hand, and let the quiet settle in. It's strange how peace can hurt. It sneaks in through the cracks where pride used to sit. I thought about everything: the text message, the wedding, the anger that burned through both of us, and the long silence that followed. Back then, I thought I'd lost him for good. Now I realized I'd just been waiting for him to grow into the man I always knew he could be. Some lessons, I guess, you can't teach. You have to live them. When I got back to the shop, Tyler was already there, leaning over a piece of maple. "You disappeared on me," he said without looking up. "Had to think," I said. "Needed quiet?" He smiled. "Did the lake still smell like fish and regret?" I chuckled. "Yeah, but less of the regret this time." We worked the rest of the morning in silence, the good kind, the kind that comes from two people who don't need to talk to understand each other. Around noon, Lisa stopped by with sandwiches and an envelope. "You two got mail," she said, setting it down. It was a letter from a veterans organization. They wanted us to design a memorial bench for the town square, a piece that would stand as a symbol of endurance, strength, and family. Tyler read it aloud, eyes bright. "They said they want something that'll last at least 50 years. I smiled, feeling a lump in my throat. Then they came to the right place. We worked on that bench for weeks. Every curve, every joint, every polish pass mattered. We used reclaimed oak from an old barn outside town, a beam that had survived decades of storms and winters. Tyler said it was poetic. I agreed. Sometimes what's been weathered is what deserves to last the longest. The day we installed it, the town gathered. Small crowd, mostly locals, neighbors, veterans, kids on bikes. The mayor said a few words about legacy and resilience, but I barely heard him. I was watching Tyler. He stood tall beside that bench, hands still marked with fresh blisters, pride shining through the fatigue. When the cloth was lifted and the sunlight hit the wood, the crowd went silent. There was something sacred about it. Simple, strong, honest. Afterward, an old man walked up, his uniform jacket frayed at the cuffs. He ran his fingers along the bench and said quietly, "You can feel the heart in this." Then he nodded to me and added, "That's what lasts." That night, Tyler and I locked up the shop and sat out back, beers in hand, the air warm and buzzing with crickets. "You know," he said, "I used to think everything had to be big to matter. Big wedding, big job, big paycheck. But turns out, small things done right last longer." I raised my bottle toward him. "That's the truth, son." He smiled, looking out over the quiet yard. "You think people will remember us, Dad? You think this shop will still be here when we're gone?" I looked at the sign glowing faintly under the porch light. Carter and Son Woodworks. The paint was faded in spots, but the wood held strong. "They'll remember what we built," I said. "And if they don't, that's fine. What matters is we built it." We sat there for a while, saying nothing else. The night deepened, and a soft wind moved through the trees. I could hear the faint creak of the bench we'd made for the town square miles away in my imagination. The sound of something solid that would hold long after both of us were gone. When I went inside later, I paused at the door and looked back one last time. The lights from the shop spilled out onto the gravel, golden and steady. It looked the same as it always had, but I knew better. Everything was different now. Because somewhere between loss and forgiveness, between pride and peace, we'd built something greater than furniture. We'd built understanding. That's what endures. And as I turned off the light, I realized I didn't fear getting old anymore, because my hands, these scarred, calloused hands, had already passed on everything worth keeping. The rest would live through him. The end.